Right. Good to see everyone this morning. Going to go ahead and get started. If you have your Bible, open to Joshua chapter 6. Joshua chapter 6. It's a good chapter. They're all good, but this is one we grew up learning about. The city of Jericho and how the Israelites will begin to conquer the land. This is the first city that they will conquer, Jericho. There's a lot of good that will happen as they conquer Jericho. There's at least one not so good thing that will happen. And we'll read about that as we continue into chapter 7. But Joshua chapter 6, we're going to get right into the text. And what I find studying a book of history like Joshua, there's two different ways to study it or to teach it in a Bible class setting. We could read verse by verse, and sometimes we do, and we connect it to as many thoughts and other verses as we can, and that takes time, and that's how you end up going through a book in 2 years. Another way of teaching it is to read the text. Some texts are lengthy, and to read it in its entirety, and it kind of teaches itself. It's history, and so you learn what they did not do. And so I say that just to say that my plan this morning is really just to read, and we'll stop and talk about what's happening directly in the text. We're not going to go to a lot of places outside of Joshua 6, but we're going to read it, stop, talk about what they're doing, work our way through, and then I would love to get into chapter 7 because there's something that happens in Jericho that will play out in chapter 7, and so if we can put those events together in our mind and in our reading and our study, but if not, that's okay. That's okay. All right, Joshua chapter 6. If you remember last week, Joshua chapter 5, this generation of men who grew up in the wilderness, they were not circumcised, and so Joshua chapter 5, God tells Joshua to circumcise that generation, and they did, and they allowed time for the men to heal, and then Joshua, at the very end of chapter 5, has this encounter with a man who stood opposite him with a sword drawn in his hand, and he is identified in the text as the commander of the army of the Lord. And I told you last week, I've always believed, and I still believe and understand that to be Jesus. And I also do not see that this meeting is coincidental, that he just happens to be there. I think he's there to encourage Joshua as Israel's leader, to encourage him, to have this conversation with him, to assure him that God truly is with him. And if we go all the way back to Joshua chapter 1, if you remember, God told Joshua at least 3 times to be strong and courageous. And if God expects Joshua and all of Israel to be strong and courageous, then every now and then God will need to reaffirm with Joshua that he is with him. And as long as Joshua and Israel will trust and have faith in him, as long as they are with God, God is with them, and they will continue to prevail. And so Joshua has this interaction with the commander of the army of the Lord. And then we get right into chapter 6. Let's begin verse 1. Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in. All right, that's one verse we need to stop for just a moment. We already read a little bit about Jericho in chapter 2. When the two spies went into Jericho, Joshua 2, to spy out the city. And so I can only imagine the report that came back. We don't know everything. Certainly, just we know a little bit. We know that the spies reported back to Joshua about Rahab. But certainly they went in to spy out the city. And so perhaps part of the report that came back was, here's the route around the city, or here's where the guard stations are, or, this is how big it is. This is how tall it is. Who knows? They went to spy it out, and they reported back to Joshua. Now, one of the great things about the city of Jericho, if you lived there, if you were a resident of the city of Jericho, is it was very heavily fortified. Very. It had a great thick wall. And when the front gates were shut, it was heavily fortified. And so I imagine that the king and all of those that lived in Jericho felt very safe. And so verse 1 says, but going back to Joshua chapter 2, Rahab tells the two spies that we've heard about the Israelites and God, and we've heard how y'all have crossed the Red Sea, and we've heard about how your God has been working. Now remember, Rahab's she's a pagan. They worshiped false gods. And so when the true God of heaven is working and performing all these grand miracles, and he's with Israel crossing the Red Sea, crossing the Jordan, and they hear about it, and they're like, wow, our God's never done anything like that. And so they already knew the power, at least, of Jericho and their God. And so they are prepared, at least as much as they can be. They are ready. They have gathered all their people. They've closed the front gate. It's secure. And that's what verse 1 reinforces for us as we study. Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. And we'll read, obviously, how God gives them the city of Jericho. But going to verse 2, and the Lord said to Joshua, let me pause one more time. A couple weeks ago, I spoke at a men's retreat in Woodstock, and my topic was Joshua. And one of the things that stands out about Joshua as a leader is he always does what God says. And so I just want you to notice as we go through the book, here in Joshua 6, but all throughout the book, how many times it says that God said to Joshua, and then Joshua said to the people. And so just take note of that in your mind and your notes. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go all around the city once. This you shall do for 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall come to pass, when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat. It's not going to crumble down. It's not going to kind of fall and still be kind of heaped up. It's going to be, God knocks it down. It's flat. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Finish this verse. And the people shall go up, every man straight before him. Let's pause right there. So this is what God says to Joshua. This is the command. And so what it's going to look like, now this is not them, this is God's command, and then we're about to read Joshua's command to the people, and then in verse 12, it says Joshua rose early in the morning, all right? That's day number 1. And so up until verse 12, we only have the command. We have God's command to Joshua, and then we have Joshua's command to the people. And so as we're reading about what they will do, it's not actually happening yet. But what God says to Joshua is, you shall have 7 priests with 7 ram's horns, and they shall go before the ark of the covenant. So the 7 priests with the horns, behind them the ark of the covenant. In front of them are the armed men, all the armed men of valor. And then in the back will be the rest of the men. And that is how they will proceed around for 6 days, one time, 6 days, on the 7th day, 7 times. So then verse 6, we have Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them. So first we have the group of priests. Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. So remember, ark, priests, 7 priests with ram's horns. And then he said to the people, so now we have the people, proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord. So it was, when Joshua had spoken to the people, that the priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. Pause right there. Again, this is the lineup. In front, you have the armed men. You have 7 priests with 7 ram's horns, and they're blowing on these horns. You have the Ark of the Covenant, and then you have the rest of the men in the back, the rear guard, and they will march in this order. Now, another very specific command to the people is, until Joshua says make noise, you don't make any noise. Silent. Don't whisper, don't shout, don't say anything until the 7th day, until Joshua tells you otherwise. Verse 10, now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout or make any noise with your voice. Nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout. Then you shall shout. So the men, other than the horns, they were to keep completely silent. Don't say a word. Don't talk to the person beside you, in front of you. Don't utter anything to yourself. Don't say a word. And they did that because God, gave them the city of Jericho. They did everything exactly. Now, let me ask this question, because this question just came into my mind. So let me throw it out there before we proceed. If you were one of the Israelites, and God said to Joshua, and then Joshua said to you, this is how we're going to take the city. Be honest. How would you react? What would your thoughts be? Yeah. Really? This is how we're going to take the city of Jericho. It might have been a little confusing to them, God has oftentimes worked in mysterious ways where we don't quite understand. And from a human, finite standpoint, we look at it and we're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. From a military standpoint, how are we going to conquer the city? By marching around it and keeping quiet, and you have the ark and you have the priests and they're blowing. How is this going to achieve anything? How is this going to conquer the land or the city of Jericho? So I imagine from a human standpoint, there were some questions. But sometimes faith has questions. Sometimes my faith has questions, and that's not the point. My faith is about acting on what God has told me to do. There are some people in our world that don't quite understand baptism. Therefore, they don't do it. They don't think it's essential. But faith acts on what God has commanded. Now, there's more to that equation. Sometimes someone's confusion on baptism is simply what their family taught them or their old preacher taught them, and so there's more to it. But my point is, oftentimes we see in Scripture something like the Israelites here. This might have been confusing, or maybe they did not understand fully, but the bigger picture is they obeyed, and God gave them Jericho. Same with Abraham and Isaac. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was, her womb was closed, and God said, well, I'm going to give you a child in your older years. Who was it? Was it Sarah that laughed initially? I'm coming to you, brother. I haven't forgotten you. Was it Sarah who laughed? But there's also a verse that says that Abraham had faith in what God said. So I don't know if God is just testing their faith, and He's told them what to do, and if and when they do it, and they've done it to a T, and God gives them the city, and they act on faith. Yes, sir. What you got? Correct. That's right. Yeah, I appreciate that, brother. I'm sorry, y'all. My contact. Oh, what is happening? Yeah, you're gonna have to give me a second. I don't know if I need to take it out. Yeah, should have worn my glasses, huh? I don't always like wearing glasses. I do every now and then, but I do have contacts. Boy, that hurt. Sorry. Now I gotta put it back in, huh? I don't know if I can do it without a mirror. don't know about this. Might have blurry vision all day. All right, let's see if that helps. All right. Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think it's both for sure. Yeah, they have seen God act, but yeah. Yeah, but with Jericho, with Israel, and they oftentimes see God doing something, and and then all of a sudden, it's not too long before they rebel or they have unbelief. The Israelites that came out of Egypt, they saw what God did with the plagues, and they crossed the Red Sea. And then when they went to spy out the land of Canaan, all of a sudden they don't believe. They don't have the faith. And that's why they were punished to wander for 40 years. And so one of the characteristics about the children of Israel is they do see God do great things, and they have these moments of great faith, and then it seems like they forget all of that, and they kind of fall back to disobedience or changing it somehow. Like even Moses, I mean, out of anger or frustration, perhaps Moses saw all the great things that God did, but when God said to speak to the rock, he hit the rock instead, so he disobeyed. And so, sure, there are moments where Israel sees God do great things, and so they know he can do great things, but there's also the human perspective where, in Joshua 6, God says, march around the city, and all these men of war and valor with swords, and they're like, no, let's just like march in and take the city. What's it going to do to march around it? Anyway, my point is, I think it shows Israel's faith in God in the fact that they followed God's instructions to a T. And because of that, now going back to what we're saying, something's going to happen in Jericho where they're going to disobey, or at least one man's going to disobey. So they weren't perfect in their obedience, but there are times that they are. So here's an example. God said to Joshua, Joshua said to the people. Now, verse 12, this is where it comes, this is it happening. Up to now, it's been the command, but verse 12, now Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then 7 priests, bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew with the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, but the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord. And we've talked about that lineup, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did 6 days. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early, about the dawning of the day, and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. And on that day only they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened, when the priests blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. So this is like a victory shout, but I also imagine that with the blow of the trumpets and the horns and the shouting of these men of valor, it would have suddenly sounded like an attack on the city. Just imagine being in the city of Jericho, and all of a sudden they are shouting. You hear these ram's horns and trumpets. Basically, if you are in Jericho, I can only imagine it's happening. And the walls fall down. Now, let's get there. Verse 17, now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. Now remember about Rahab. She's a harlot and she is a pagan. But she hears about God's power and works, and she acts against her nature. She does something against her pagan beliefs. She acts on this rumor of the power of God. She shows faith. Her family is spared. She is in the genealogy of Jesus. Her family is spared. Verse 18, and you by all means abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things and make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord. Now, that's all we have, kind of that little insert there of what they were to do as they attack the city. So they march around the city, the walls will fall down. I've always heard, and it may be in our text if I passed over it and just don't remember as we continue reading, that the walls fell outward, which would also be helpful as they run into the city instead of having to climb up maybe over the fallen walls. The walls falling outward would have provided like a ramp into the city. They would have been able to flood the city more easily as the walls fall out. They are told to spare Rahab and her family, and her window was marked with a scarlet cord. They are also told that they are not to take any of the things that are consecrated to the Lord to be put into the Lord's treasury. The gold, the silver, the vessels of bronze, iron, all of the valuables are to be taken and put into the Lord's treasury. Now, you may ask why. I don't really have an answer for you as of right now, but one commentator, member of the church that I like to read his explanation of things, his name is Bob Winton. He said it was most likely for, God doesn't need all these gold, silver, bronze, iron. It's not for God. It's ultimately for Israel. As they conquer the land, it's for them to live on, to buy, sell, trade. It's for them, but not individually. They are to collect it for the Lord's treasury as a whole, but not to take it individually. David cannot go in and take what David wants. It's to be for Israel, consecrated for the Lord, set aside. Imagine if all of the men of war ran into the city and took whatever they wanted. And that's just not the way that it is going to be here. And so they are going to take the valuables, but consecrate it into the treasury of the Lord. Now, we don't read it yet, but in chapter 7, we will read about Achan, who took of those valuables and what happens there. All right, let's finish here. Verse 20. So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets, and it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went up into the city. I believe that phrasing there is why many commentators and Bible scholars believe the walls fell outward. First of all, if you attack a city, you're going to push the walls inward. But if God knocks down the walls, he's going to do it from the inside out. They're going to fall down. But that wording there, that they went up into the city, perhaps the walls fell down again like a ramp system where they were able to walk straight up right into the city. They fell down flat, then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both men and women, young and old. I know that's hard to read. It's hard to imagine. Ox, sheep, donkey, all with the edge of the sword. Then Joshua had said, came to spies in chapter 2 that he sent into the city, right? They're familiar with the layout. They're familiar with where Rahab's house was, right? So these two spies who went and bring the woman and all that she has, as you swore to her, and the young men went, who had been spies, went and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all her relatives and led the camp and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver, gold, the vessels of bronze and iron. She dwells and it over to the Israelite religion, to a Jew, to this day, because she hid the messengers up and builds this city. So the Lord was spread throughout all the country. And so if we pause right there, I do want to get into chapter 7 to reference something that happened as they how, at least for the third time now, the fame of Israel, and now particularly Joshua, as they heard about the crossing of the Red Sea. And then it says when they crossed the Jordan, it says about the kings, the Amorite kings, and the kings of the Canaanites. So Joshua chapter 5, who were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters. And so they heard about that of Joshua as Israel's leader has spread throughout all the country. And so, it's a lot of these. I imagine you live in this circle, and you just have to wonder, if I go to bed tonight, will I wake up in the morning, or will Israel be here attacking us, right? They heard about Israel, and eventually they will conquer all of the land. All right, so I've got about 10 minutes, and that's enough time. So in Jericho, they take Jericho, half of the tribe. They're going to go curse things for the last part of chapter 1. So the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel, which is beside Beth Aven on the east side of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai, and they returned. And they returned to Joshua and said to him, Now listen, it's almost like you're a sports team. You even have to try out 2 or 3 Ai. Do not weary all the people there, for the people of they're looking at God's not with you. You're not taking. The army came and they were fighting. Amalek started to prevail. Right, the army came and they were fighting. Amalek started to prevail. Right. So it all depended on. Right. So it all depended on Joshua or Moses' hands held up. They're there from the people, and they flee as they are fleeing down parts of some of the men. Therefore, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. And Joshua, he's lost. Joshua doesn't really know why. And he fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord and presence of God. So until evening, he and the elders of Israel, he sees it. He sees it. He sees the shiny stuff, and he desires it. He covets it. It's one of the 10 commandments that God gave to Israel. You shall not covet. That's He saw it and wanted it. That's the problem. One of the problems. So, let me get to a good stopping point. About 1 minute left. Put it among their own stuff. Verse 12. Therefore, the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they have become doomed to destruction. Neither will I be with you anymore, unless you destroy the accursed from among you. That's a good stopping point. So, we will continue reading chapter 7 and learn how they found out it was Achan. They basically go through all of the camp and question all the people, and they find that it was Achan. They stone him, they burn him, his body, and everything is restored. And they will then go up and defeat Ai. Any questions, comments as we conclude? Hey, yes, sir. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good thoughts. Appreciate that. All right. Appreciate your attention. You are dismissed. I don't know if I always need to say that, but you are dismissed.